You know that feeling when you're scrolling through your
and
feed,
everyone who
half
loves a
paying
true
attention,
underdog
and
story that
something
turns into
stops you cold? That happened to me the other day, but it wasn't a celebrity breakup or some viral challenge. It was a photograph, grainy and a little faded, of a
a
man standing next
monumental,
to what looked like an
history-making
oversized metal
triumph.
beach ball
You
with legs. And the caption? It just said, "The secret that nearly broke the space race."
are
I was
tuning
hooked
into what might
immediately
just be the
because
most
I thought I knew
spectacular,
everything about that era. I knew about Sputnik, I knew about Gagarin, I knew about the moon landing. But this was a story that had been
jaw-dropping
quietly
narratives
swept under the
unfold
rug
on
for
the hallowed
decades.
grass
A
courts
story of cutting-edge science, hair-raising danger, and a decision that could have changed the entire trajectory of human history.
here.
And the
Today,
craziest part
we
is that it all comes down to an American hero named Bill
have a flash of
Dana
rising
and a
superstars
flying machine
and
that looked like
unforgettable
it was designed by a committee of mad scientists. To really get why this is so important, we have to go back to the early 1960s. The Cold War was at its frostiest, and the space race was the ultimate high-stakes game of
comeback
one-upmanship.
that will be
The
etched in the
Americans
annals
had
of
just
Wimbledon
watched the
history
Soviets
forever.
achieve a massive victory with Yuri Gagarin, and the pressure was on. NASA was a young agency, incredibly
Shockwave sent to the
ambitious,
tennis world
but
when
also facing
21-year-old
a
Filipino
very brutal reality. We were losing. Our rockets were blowing up on the launch
This
pad.
is a cultural
We were lagging
milestone,
behind
a
in
tactical
almost every major milestone, and the entire free world was starting to doubt if we could ever catch up. The atmosphere inside NASA wasn't just
2026.
competitive, it was
This isn't just a
desperate.
sports highlight.
They knew they had to do something radical, something that
18
would
million
change the
people on our
rules of the
shoulders.
game
To
entirely.
tr-
They couldn't just keep doing what the Soviets were doing, only slightly better. They had to
Yes.
think completely out
We
of the
have to
box.
set the
And that's when the conversations about a space plane started to
stage.
get serious.
The All-England Lawn
Now,
Tennis
the
and Croquet
problem with traditional spaceflight back then was the same problem we struggle with today, although for different reasons. It was
legends are
wasteful
born,
and
and
incredibly
we're dream-
expensive. You'd build this massive, multi-stage rocket, light a fire under it, and use it for maybe 10 minutes to hurl
Truly
a
understand the
tiny
gravity of
capsule
what
into orbit. Then, the rest of it would just fall into the ocean or burn up in the atmosphere. It was like building a brand new
is a
luxury
place
car
where
just to drive to the grocery store and then setting it on fire. The engineers knew there had to be a way to create a spacecraft that could fly into space, do its job, and then fly back home to land on a runway like a regular airplane.
We are talking
It
about
just
a match
made
that
sense.
had absolutely
The
everything.
dream was a single stage-to-orbit vehicle, a craft that could take off under its own power, reach the vacuum of space, and then return gracefully, ready to be refueled and sent back up again. It was the holy grail of spaceflight, and the Air Force in particular was obsessed with the military applications of such a vehicle. You could have a space-based reconnaissance platform, a bomber that could strike anywhere on Earth in under an hour, all at the ready, housed in a hangar and waiting for a crew. It was a vision that seemed too good to be true, and as we'd find out, it kind of was. But they had to try. So, they built the X-20 dinosaur. Just the name sounds like something out of a comic book, right? Dinosaur, short for dynamic soarer. It was a sleek, delta-winged spacecraft designed to be launched atop a Titan rocket, glide through the upper atmosphere, skip off it like a flat stone across a pond, and cover thousands of miles in a matter of minutes. The Air Force selected a group of 7 elite pilots to fly this thing, men who were part test pilot, part astronaut, and part gladiator. They were the best of the best. One of those men was Neil Armstrong. Think about that for a second. Before he was the first man to walk on the moon, Armstrong was on the shortlist to fly a hypersonic glider that would test the very limits of human endurance. The project was incredibly ambitious, and the pilots trained for years. They flew experimental aircraft, they ran countless simulations, and they were ready to be the vanguard of a new era of aerospace. But even as the dinosaur was being developed, a parallel project was taking shape in the mind of an engineer at a tiny NASA research center in California. This wasn't a big, flashy, top-secret military project. This was a scrappy, almost guerrilla-style operation being led by a man named Dale Reed. Reed was a true visionary, but he was also a pragmatist. He looked at the dinosaur, with its expensive Titan boosters and its supersonic skip-glide trajectory, and he saw a design that was too complex, too risky, and too expensive to be truly successful. He believed that the future wasn't in skipping off the atmosphere like a stone, but in lifting off from it. He wanted to build a vehicle that could ascend under its own power, no monstrous booster rocket needed, just pure aerodynamic lift. He called his concept a lifting body because the shape of the craft itself would generate the lift needed to fly. It was a radical departure from every other spacecraft being designed at the time. Where other vehicles were sleek and aerodynamic, Reed's lifting body looked like a blimp that had been run over by a steamroller. It was fat, stubby, and looked utterly incapable of flight. It was essentially a flying brick. Reed knew he was fighting an uphill battle. He wasn't a high-ranking official in Washington, and the bigwigs at NASA were obsessed with the dinosaur. But he was a stubborn man, and he had a deep conviction that his idea was right. So, he did what any good engineer would do. He scrounged, he begged, and he borrowed. He used his own money and the goodwill of his colleagues to build a small, pilotless model. He wanted to prove that his theoretical design could actually fly. And it did. The model, which looked like a chubby, bulbous capsule, flew in the wind tunnel. He showed the results to his superiors, but they weren't impressed. They told him to stick to the dinosaur, to drop the flying bathtub idea. But Reed was relentless. He realized that to truly prove his concept, he couldn't just have a model in a wind tunnel. He needed to fly it. He needed a pilot. And that's where a soft-spoken, unassuming engineer named Bill Dana comes into the picture. Bill Dana was a genius, a true rocket scientist with a PhD from Stanford. But he was also the quiet type, a man who preferred numbers to glory. He was the exact opposite of the swaggering, chest-thumping test pilots of the era. Dana understood Reed's concept too.